Well, hello, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm your host, David the Skeptic, and I'm joined by, it's just me. It's me. It's my dog and my cat, and me. David Russell had to go to work at the last minute, and so we will not be doing exactly the podcast I wrote up. The write-up that I did, you will be able to find it on the board, skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. You can read that write-up. I wrote it with the intention of conversation between two people. And I didn't want to just talk about the thing that I am posting on the board by myself, because not a lot of new insight can come out of that. And so I put together an entirely different show on the same subject to talk to you about today. So today we will be discussing the subject of marriage. This is the topic that we would have been talking about. It's just that I'll be making completely different points. We'll be talking about marriage and in particular, why I don't think it is a particularly good idea. I understand that this is the first part of a conversation, so you can kind of think of it as part one, because I suspect that Russell and I will get back to doing this show either before the season is over or maybe before the week is over. We'll be able to do this show and have the conversation the way it was intended to be, but this is the time for you to get a new show in the feed. And so you're going to get this, you're going to get the blog post, and we can get a head start on the discussion. So I don't intend that any of this is the last word on the subject, but it kind of introduces the subject. Now, I don't believe that marriage is a particularly good idea. Let me just get that out of the way up front. I'm not really in favor of marriage as an institution. I'm not fond of the institution of marriage. I have my reasons. I will not get to all of them on this podcast. But I think that the course of human history tells us that marriage is not a particularly good idea. And when I speak of marriage, I'm mostly thinking about the Judeo-Christian version of marriage. And there are some differences between the Jewish version of marriage and the Christian version of marriage. But if you say Judeo-Christian, then you're kind of hinting at some of the things the Bible has to say about marriage, and mostly the New Testament is what I'm talking about. So I could even say New Testament marriage, but when Jesus talks about marriage, he actually reaches back into the Old Testament a little bit. So it can get a little confusing, but that said, the Judeo-Christian version of marriage is the thing that I am inveighing against right now. But I want to be clear, I'm not in favor of any version of marriage, and there have been a lot of versions of marriage. And so one of the first questions that you have to ask is, why marriage? Why do we think that marriage is a good idea? You see, I think that humans simply were not made for lifetime monogamous relationships. It's just not in us. Some people can make it work if they work really hard, but it seems that most of us can't make it work, or at least half of us can't make it work. It just is not realistic. This idea of one man, one woman for life, even people who marry and settle down and stay with each other forever, that's often not their first sexual partner on either side. So the idea that you're having sex with one person for the entirety of your life is just not true. Even in successful marriages, that's usually not the case, where this was the first sexual experience. We weren't made for it. And we're going to look at some of the statistical information that makes me say this, but I want to start with the theological side of things, because that's really the tell. If you want to know why marriage is probably not a good idea, you have to look at some of the origins of Christian thinking on the subject. And so I'm going to just make a case right now. In fact, I'm not going to make a case so much. I'll do that when I have someone besides myself to talk to. But I'm going to suggest that the real motivation for marriage in the Christian worldview is sexual legitimacy. That's pretty much it. Sexual legitimacy. Otherwise, if you just kind of look at what the New Testament says about marriage, marriage is probably not a particularly good idea, even from a religious point of view. Do you really want people to make laws about marriage who don't think that marriage is a particularly good idea? I think you probably don't. And if you look at some of the most influential people bloviating about marriage, Catholic priests, hello, they're unmarried. A lot of preachers are unmarried, even though Protestantism doesn't, there's no prohibition against preachers marrying. Not every preacher is married, but if you just go back and look in the Bible, the people who talked about it most in the New Testament and who, quote unquote, laid down the law on marriage originally, Jesus and Paul, notoriously unmarried men. Now, God, he came to earth and he could bother to live and go through childhood and adolescence and puberty. And it was okay for him to have an earthly ministry and be rejected and put up on a cross and crucified. But he couldn't be bothered with that nasty, messy, yucky institution of marriage. That's one of those things that would have been, what I guess, beneath the dignity of God. What kind of mess would we have had if Jesus had had kids? Ugh. That would have been constant war. So maybe it's a good idea he didn't, but for an institution that is supposedly extremely important in the Christian worldview, maybe the most important configuration of human beings, Jesus eschewed it like the plague, and so did Paul. So I'm going to start off by making the case that in the biblical worldview, marriage, while allowed, is not really preferable. It's not really a great idea. So let's just start. I've got a few tabs open. I'll do a little reading, which is something I don't like to do on mic, but I don't have anyone else to put it off on, so I guess I'll do it myself. Let's look at, let's see, this is verse 34. This is Luke chapter 20. And we'll scooch down here. I really could start at around verse 30. The second, and then the third, Mary, I don't want to do that. So verse 34. This is after Jesus was asked this kind of this trick question, I guess. 7 brothers had married a woman, and they each died in turn, and so they had each married her. And who is going to be whose wife will she be in the resurrection? So verse 34, Jesus said to them, the people of this age, this is one of the most interesting readings of this. You can see this story in 2 or 3 of the Gospels. I don't remember how many. The people of this age marry and are given to marriage. I'll pause right there for a moment. Notice the language, marry and are given to marriage. Those who marry are men. Those who are given to marriage, given in marriage, are women. Just reflect on that for a bit as you reflect on marriage. I might cover that in another tab. But those who are regarded as worthy to share in that age and in the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. So marriage, according to Jesus, is just one of those things you do here. But if you're going to be worthy of the next age, don't worry about marriage, because marriage is not something you do there. I could go further in this passage, but I've got a lot to cover, so I will leave it there, only to say that in heaven, this ultimate condition of paradise, there is no marriage. Are you crazy? Of course there would be no marriage, because marriage is this yucky, gross institution that has nothing to do with perfected beings. It's only there for unperfected beings. We'll talk about that. But marriage is not this holy and sacred configuration of human beings that God envisioned from the beginning. That's not how the Bible views it at all. It's not a configuration that we will continue to have in heaven. No, I'm sorry, Mormons. You're just wrong about that if we're going to listen to the Jesus of the New Testament. Marriage is not the kind of thing that you want to do for eternity. It's not good enough for heaven. Good enough for earth, sure. Heaven, no. So let's see. What do we have here? Looking at Matthew chapter 19. There's a lot of stuff in this chapter we could look at. Let's come to, let's say, 8. Jesus said to them, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because of your hard hearts. But from the beginning, it was not this way. Now I say to you that whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another commits adultery. Okay, so you've all heard that before. You may not have heard this part before. So the disciples said to him, if this is the case of a husband with a wife, it is better not to marry. So the interpretation of Jesus' direct words from the people who were closest to Jesus is, if that's what marrying is, who would want to do it? It's better not to do it at all. Jesus' response to that was basically, yeah, you're true that. That's pretty much what he says. I'll read what he says because it doesn't read exactly that way, but that's the upshot of it. You can look in, you can do what I did and look in every commentary that you can find, and at the end of the day, that's pretty much what he's saying. So it's better not to marry, his disciples said, and he, being Jesus, said to them, not everyone can accept this statement, except those to whom it has been given. This is one of those mystery religion kind of phrases, but we'll skip over that. For there are some eunuchs. You know, if you go online and you listen on YouTube, you'll hear a lot of people calling them eunuchs. Eunuchs. Christians have a little bit of literacy in Bible literacy. This is not talking about the prophet. Okay, eunuchs. A eunuch is someone who has been castrated, or it could also mean someone who voluntarily abstains from sex in this time. They're not eunuchs. Stop it, guys. For there are some eunuchs who were that way from birth, and some who were made eunuchs by others. Kind of self-explanatory there. And some who became eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And then it finishes with another one of these mysterious phrases. The one who is able to accept this should accept it. Now the upshot is, yeah, guys, it is better not to be married. It's better to be like a eunuch, which is to say someone who abstains from sex. And if you can do it, that's what you should do. There's a little tell in this passage. It was in toward the end of verse 12 here. By others, and some who became eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. This is actually a fairly common theme. You know, we chose not to have sex for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. That's presented as a good thing, something that benefits the kingdom of heaven. Throughout the New Testament, marriage is never presented as something that is done so that the kingdom of heaven can be benefited. Marriage is actually presented as the opposite of that. So we'll get to that. in short order. But Jesus' preference is for eunuchs, because you're not going to be married in heaven, and you're better off not marrying on earth. And so if you can handle it, don't. that's the upshot. 1 Corinthians 7. I'll read more of this than I want to. I'm just going to start at the beginning. Now, with regard to the issues you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. So you can stop. Actually, you can stop right there. This is Paul. This is his feeling on the matter. I'll read it again. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Period. Full stop. That's what he thinks. That's what they think. It goes on to say, but because of immoralities, each man should have relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. Okay, so we're kind of giving you an out. You can go ahead and marry for the sake of sexual legitimacy. That's what this is. A husband should fulfill his marital responsibilities to his wife. Oh, woe is me! I got to do my responsibility again. And likewise, a wife to her husband. It is not the wife who has the rights to her own body, in case you were wondering what it meant by marital responsibilities. It's talking about sex, okay? It is not the wife who has the rights to her own body, but the husband. Let that sink in. Husband has the right to wife's body. Now, for the sake of egalitarianism, he also says, in the same way, it is not the husband who has the rights to his own body, but the wife. Because we need it. Because we're animals. So, do not deprive each other, he goes on to say, except by mutual agreement for a specific period of time, so that you may devote yourself to prayer. Now, what does this mean? That your best time for prayer and devotion is when you're not having sex. So this period that you set aside that you're going to be celibate, that's when you can really get religious. Think about that. It gets worse. Then he says, resume your relationship so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. In other words, you are animals. I know you're animals, you know you're animals, and you're gonna start having sex. And so that's why you're married, so that you can have sex to each other in a situation of sexual legitimacy, so that you don't go looking for sex somewhere else. This is really all the Bible has to say when it comes to marriage for the reason why we marriage. It's about sexual legitimacy. And if you don't give a tinker's damn about some Christians' idea of sexual legitimacy, then you too should probably be against the notion of marriage, at least the notion that Christians currently have with it. So let me read just a little bit more. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that everyone was as I am, which is to say, abstinent. That's what he means there. Look it up. I wish that everyone was as I am, but each has his own gift from God. One this way, another that. So, all right. Yeah, let's go ahead and skip down to verse 32, same chapter. And I want you to be free from the concerns. An unmarried man is concerned about the things of the Lord. Remember what we said about Jesus, about Jesus' comment a little bit earlier. As a eunuch, you can devote yourself to God more fully. Here's Paul kind of echoing that. An unmarried man is concerned about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. Well, what about a married man, Paul? He says, but a married man is concerned about the things of the world, how to please his wife. That's terrible. How to please his wife. And he is divided. This is Paul's idea. If you're married, your loyalties are divided. An unmarried woman or a virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, to be holy both in body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the things of the world, how to please her husband. I'm saying this for your benefit, not to place a limitation on you, but so that, excuse me, so that without distraction, you may give notable and constant service to the Lord. In another place, I think it was earlier in the chapter, Paul says it's better to marry than to burn, and you might continue that thought out with it's better to marry than to burn with passion, because an unmarried person is just a heaving organ of lust. Some Christians suggest that it means it's better to marry than to burn in hell because you were having sex unmarried. I don't actually think that's what that passage means, but it's awful either way, because for Paul and for Jesus, the only way that a person should be having sex is through marriage. It provides sexual legitimacy. And that this is somehow a better way for humans to be than unmarried. Well, is that true? Do statistics bear that out? Do our own observations bear that out? Is this traditional view of marriage, one man, one woman for life, actually a better arrangement for humans? Is this something good for humans? I said at the beginning, I don't think it is. And part of the reason I believe that is because Jesus in particular, and religion generally, is a thing that starts with the assumption that humans are bad. Humans are bad. They're broken. They're messed up. And to fix the human condition, you've got to change the natural human way of being. So part of the natural human way of being is a fairly open and free sexuality. That's human. And Jesus is saying, no, you cannot be human. Humanity is bad. You've got to go against your nature and do this marriage thing in this way. That's it. The Christian idea of marriage actually goes against human nature. And maybe that explains why it goes so badly so often. So I just want to take a couple of things. I'll be providing these links in the show. This is an article on the origins of marriage. If you are one of those poor Christians who are suffering from the delusion that marriage was invented by Christians or even Jews, you are sadly mistaken. That is not the case. So humans have had arrangements that you might call marriage for a long time, but it hasn't looked like it does in the Jewish and Christian version. So I'm going to read just a little bit from this piece. The best available evidence suggests that it's being marriage, about 4,350 years old. For thousands of years before that, most anthropologists believe families consisted of loosely organized groups of as many as 30 people, with several male leaders, multiple women shared by them, and children. As hunters and gatherers settled down into agrarian civilizations, society had a need for more stable arrangements. The first recorded evidence of a marriage ceremony uniting one man and one woman and one man dates from about 2350 BC. For those of you keeping score, that's before Moses. In Mesopotamia, over the next several hundred years, marriage evolved into a widespread institution embraced by the ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and Romans. But back then, marriage had little to do with love or religion. Just pause there for a moment. Marriage, we can call all kinds of arrangements marriage. Has been around for a long time. The idea that we have of marriage has not been around for a long time. And so I have heard some Christian apologists cite how old the institution of marriage is as a way of suggesting, you see, this is how our natural yearning is, and that is simply not true. Don't let them get away with that. I won't say they're lying, they're probably just ignorant. A lot of what passed for marriage would not pass for marriage today. It was not marriage. The idea that we have as marriage is fairly new in human history. And so those are the facts. It's fairly new because it's fairly against how humans are made. It's not to say that some people can't make it work, but it is not the most natural arrangement of humans. I want to read one more paragraph of this before moving on to the next. I guess I could call them slides. The next tab. Marriage's primary purpose was to bind women to men, and thus guarantee that a man's children were truly his biological heirs. Once again, we're talking about legitimacy, except in this case, we're talking about the legitimacy of heirs, not mere sexual legitimacy. Through marriage, a woman became a man's property. Let me say that again. Through marriage, a woman became a man's property. In the betrothal ceremony of ancient Greece, a father would hand over his daughter with these words: "I pledge my daughter for the purpose of producing legitimate offspring." Among the ancient Hebrews, men were free to take several wives. Married Greeks and Romans were free to satisfy their sexual urges with concubines, prostitutes, and even teenage male lovers, while their wives were required to stay home and tend the household. If wives failed to produce offspring, their husbands could give them back and marry someone else. This actually sounds very biblical. Especially the idea of concubines. Remember concubines? The first time you ever heard the concept of concubines, it's in the Bible. Some of the holiest men in the Bible had concubines. In some cases, lots of them. Concubines were not wives. They were female sex properties. That's pretty much what they were. So, I mean, you could try to gloss that over in some way that helps you sleep at night. But that's what it was, and God seemed to be okay with that. And marriage was not one man, one woman for life. No, marriage was one man and as many women as he could afford, essentially. Plus girlfriends. Okay. So it talks about when religion came and became involved, and how marriage started to change. It's a good article. I encourage you to follow that link and read it. You'll find all of the links in my write-up. There may not even be much of a write-up today. I might post the write-up. But you'll see the links. If I do have a write-up, it'll be after at the end of the write-up. You can look at sources, and it'll have these links. You can just click on them and follow them. So, what about marriage today, which is heavily influenced by religion? Is it a good idea? Does it work? Is this the most natural and beneficial arrangement for humans? Well, let's look at some U.S. divorce rates for various faith groups, age groups, in geographic areas. Now, first of all, marriage should be so low among religious groups, among faith groups, that there shouldn't even be a category for faith groups. So the fact that every survey and statistic has a category for faith groups should tell you something even before you look at the numbers. It's a big enough number that we got to count it. So right here and now, we can see, yeah, no, this is actually a problem because the people who believe this garbage the most are also having at least the same trouble keeping it together as people who don't. But is that true? Let's see. Divorce rates in the U.S. Let's see. Let's see. And I'm not gonna. I'll just go over a few numbers here. The normal lifestyle of American young adults is live together for a period of time in a type of informal trial marriage. These relationships frequently do not endure. Okay, that's true enough. And then couples in their first marriage at an older age because they're not 16 anymore. So let's move down from here. This has a lot of information that I recommend you read. In fact, I'm gonna skip down to a few of the numbers. 11% of the adult population is currently divorced. Now, this is going to be people who are currently divorced and not remarried. They're just right now divorced. These are not the people who are very likely to be divorced in the future. These are just the people who are divorced right now, about 11%. 25% of adults have had at least one divorce during their lifetime. So this suggests that second marriages are very popular because the first ones don't really go that well. Then divorce rates, this was the one that'll raise your eyebrows. This line right here. Divorce rates among conservative Christians were significantly higher than for other faith groups and much higher than atheists and agnostics experienced. You want me to read that one again? Did that one go by a little fast? Divorce rates among conservative Christians were significantly higher than for other faiths. So even among Christians, the more conservative you are, generally, the more likely you are to divorce. But more damning, it's much higher than atheists and agnostics. So if we are measuring success of marriage by longevity, and by the way, I do not measure the success of marriage by longevity. But if that's your measurement, atheists do it better. Christians are terrible at marriage. They're terrible. Let's look at various religious groups. This is a Barna report. Barna is a Christian, by the way. So he does these statistics. He is not trying to harm Christianity, not at all. Variations in divorce rate among Christian faith groups. So the non-denominationals top this list. The Baptists are next. Mainline Protestants are next, followed by Mormons, Catholics, and Lutherans. Now, I want to just give you a word about non-denominational because I don't want you to be tripped up by that. Non-denominational is generally a buzzword for extremely fundamentalist. Okay. These are the guys that are so fundamentalist that they think that even the conservative denominations are too liberal. So, um, right. The more non denominational you are, as a general rule, this is not always the case. As a general rule, non denominational is extremely conservative, extremely fundamentalist. The highest group of Christians who suffer divorce, these guys, followed by the biggest group in America, the Baptists and the mainline Protestants. So, yeah. So, variation in divorce rates by religion. I take a little bit of issue to the way these numbers are put together, but it's not worth talking about right here. The religion, they have it listed as Jews, born again Christians, other Christians, and atheists, agnostics. The Jews were the highest here, followed closely by the born again Christians. Are you born again, brother? You are way higher than atheists and agnostics, who have the lowest level. Huh. Huh. Let's see. Variations in divorce rates by age. Yeah, we'll leave that for the boards. Location. This one's really interesting. You know who leads it? It's not a surprise. The South, otherwise known as the Bible Belt. In fact, many surveys just call it out as the Bible Belt. This is where you find the most divorce, and it's tied with the Midwest, which is also very Bible-y. So there you go. The more Bible, more chances of divorce. The heathen Northeast, only 19%. They're the lowest divorce rate. I mean, wow. And so I'm just going to pause here, slow roll this. You can see the states where it's really high. Arkansas, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, New Mexico, Oklahoma, of course, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Texas. Yeah. I suspect it would be a lot higher if they had Louisiana data. So, yeah. And I actually suspect that it's higher. And let me tell you just briefly as I scroll through this a little bit. For those of you who are not going to click on the links, here's why I think it's actually a little bit higher. Catholics have a little bit of a cheat. Catholics don't divorce, you see. They never divorce because divorce isn't allowed in the Catholic Church. So those running the gauntlet and divorcing in the Catholic Church might in fact be facing excommunication. That may have been the case at least at one point. What Catholics do allow, by the way, I fully expect to be corrected by Arthur. So I'm ready for it. If Arthur doesn't step up, Brian with an I surely will. Bring on the latest pronouncements of the latest Pope. And so if you are the kind of person who keeps up with that sort of thing, just look in the comments shortly after this is over, and we will see what smackdown I am given by Brian with an I or Arthur. We will just see. Skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. The Catholics have an out. It's called annulment. And I strongly suspect that Catholics don't count their divorcees. And so if you actually counted them, and if you actually call the quote-unquote annulments divorces, the number of Christians divorcing would be a lot higher. So they're cheating the numbers down a little bit, and it's still damning. Let's see. I got more to cover, so I'll finish with this bit. Um, Goes over some reasons why divorce rates might be higher in the Bible Belt. There's a call out for the Bible Belt there. There are three reasons, and I will touch on them quickly. Hopefully, this will be taken up in the board. Tyler B., this is your assignment. I suspect good charts from you on this. Couples in the South enter their first marriage at a younger age. Check. Family incomes in the South are lower. Check. Educational attainment is lower in the South. Also, check. I would say that all three of these things is kind of attributable to religion, especially the way it's practiced in the South, because marriage is such a priority because sex is going to happen. Sex is going to happen, folks. It's going to happen. You put a young 16-year-old male and a young 16-year-old female in a box and you shake them up and down and you'll end up with a baby. That's just going to happen because we're animals. So because there is such a high premium on purity culture in the Bible Belt, you have to marry as soon as the law allows. And so the marriages happen at a younger age. And two of the things that are going to be a result of marrying so young is that you hadn't made any money yet. Even if you're going to make money later, you haven't made any yet. And you haven't finished your education yet. And that affects the longevity prospects of a marriage. Thanks, Christianity. Thanks. So it looks like this isn't where we've got one more slide here, one more tile. I won't I won't talk about this one too long. The headline says it all. Evangelicals are the least faithful when it comes to spouses, survey says. Now, the interesting thing about this survey, and this comes from, well, let's see, I don't see it up here, but well, it's covered up by, this is, I think, from the New York Daily News. I can't prove it. I don't remember where this came from. The link will be in the notes. But the survey came from Ashley Madison. Yeah, right there. Ashley Madison. Do you guys know what Ashley Madison is? Well, you atheists probably don't know because you're not fooling around quite as much. But the Christians know what Ashley Madison is. It's a website that encourages people to have an affair. It's an affair hookup site. In fact, let's just go ahead and click on it here. So this is Ashley Madison site. Life is short. Have an affair. That's that's how they do it. So if anybody in America knows who's having affairs or who's looking to have an affair, it's these guys. They know exactly who's trolling for, something on the side. Okay. I don't think you're going to get a better source of data than this. It says, in fact, a quarter of the survey participants self-identify as evangelical, making it the most common faith among the unfaithful. I just love that line. I'll read it again. A quarter of the survey participants self-identify. These are just the people who admit it. Self-identify as evangelical, making it the most common faith among the unfaithful. So many of the would-be cheaters on the site are also Protestant, almost 23%. or Catholic, about 23%. Um, the study also found that 24% men, 32% women. So these good, godly, pure women, they are looking for some action, baby. Forget Ashley Madison. Christian Mingle ought to net you a date tonight. So let's see. Yeah. So skip it down. Overall, the survey results reflect the breakdown of religions in the U.S. In other words, it goes with the rest of the data. There was another piece in here. I just wanted to note. Let's see, a quote from somebody who I don't care about. You can go and pray every Sunday or Saturday or 3 times a day. It may not make a difference in how monogamous you are, this person says. So the statistics seem to bear that out. Yeah, the group who is least likely, although I don't see it in this article, the group least likely to have affairs, atheists. But hey, sure. Now, looking at marriage theologically, are these really the people that you want to have a say on marriage? Just consider the subject of gay marriage. This comes from a God who once thought that it was perfectly okay to say, kill homosexuals. Do we really want to listen to that God's opinion on gay marriage? Honestly, it doesn't matter if it's a few thousand years later and maybe he's grown up a little more. I say he's disqualified forever from weighing in on marriage. I don't care about his opinion anymore. If Jesus is that guy, I don't care about his opinion. But Jesus goes further than that. He says, you know what, marriage, not even that great. If you're really faithful, if you're a real insider, you wouldn't marry. And don't worry about it. If you are married, it's not like a sin, but you won't be married in the afterlife because the institution ain't that great. And Jesus, giving us the best example of human configurations, goes without marrying. And after a few passings of the torch, we get to Paul, who says outright, you know what, marriage, not that great. But since you're a bunch of animals, better to marry than to burn. But if you can do without it, just don't. Just don't. Stay away from it. If you really want to work in God's kingdom and do your best work for Jesus, stay focused on Jesus, don't marry. Don't divide your attention between God and the things of this world. Things like trying to please your spouse. Yeah, you're not going to be as useful to God's kingdom if you do that. Don't marry. You want to listen to that guy's advice about marriage? That's the guy you want to listen to? Are you kidding me? And finally, we can look and we can see if what the Christians have to say about marriage pans out. Because, you can always say, well, you can say that marriage is for sexual legitimacy, but life is generally better for Christians and they have better marriages. And all you have to do is listen to them and model their behavior and you'll see for yourself. Well, okay, so what is the survey said? Every survey that I could find says that Christians are the worst when it comes to marriage, assuming that you use longevity as your yardstick. They're the worst, and they are most likely to have affairs. They're certainly not better than atheists. They can't keep it in their pants either. In fact, they're worse at it. Those are the guys that you want making laws about marriage? Really? On what basis? Let me just close with this. Let me close with this. I'm not a fan of marriage. Okay, no matter who does it. But if you're going to get married, I think there's a better measurement than longevity. Because I honestly don't see the point. If you say that marriage is so that you can have stable families for children, okay, you only need to be married for about 18 years. And for most of us, that's far from forever. Okay. So there is no reason for forever when it comes to children. The measuring stick, I think, is preferable to longevity is happiness. It's happiness. And it might also be prosperity. Will a marriage for a given amount of time help both parties prosper? That might be a good question to ask, because they might decide that a contractual arrangement is good for both houses. All right. So if you can make that case, I think that that's a good case to make. But more to the point, I just think it's human happiness. And if you are married for 10 years and are happy, and then have an amicable divorce, or even a messy divorce for that matter. So maybe it takes you a year to get divorced because you're unhappy for a year, but you're happy for 10 years and you're unhappy for 1 year. You're happy for more than 90% of the time. Is that more than 90% of the time or less than 90% of the time? Some of you mathematicians figure it out. We'll call it about 90% of the time. That's a better situation than if you're married for 50 years, but you stopped being happy, you started being miserable 30 years ago. That's a terrible marriage. And that's the kind of marriage that religious people promote. It's the marriage that says, well, just stick it out because God wants you to. Just stick it out. Just stay there. You're trapped anyway. Stay trapped and unhappy. And so when we look at the statistics of Christians and their marriages, one of the things that none of these surveys that I could find took note of is whether you were happy in your marriage. And I can tell you, having been a minister and been in church for a long time, the vast majority of my life, I can tell you that Christian couples, in as many cases as I've seen outside of the church, are simply not happy. And they stay for much longer periods of time than they should. And because they feel trapped, women often suffer the brunt of this because they can't leave, because God told them they can't leave, when they would be much better off doing so. I think that it is past time we retire the idea of longevity as the thing that makes marriage good. It is not. And I also think that it is way past time that we retire the idea of sexual legitimacy. As if sex outside of marriage, which is, by the way, the same sex as you have inside of marriage, as if that sex is somehow dirty. But if you're married, then it's okay. We've got to move past that. And when we do, when we can move past both of those things, I think the days of marriage, as we understand it, will be numbered. And it is my great hope that that number is very small. And that's the view from the skeptic. So long, everybody.